Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new video for the machine quilting block party. Today we're learning how to piece block number 10, and it's an awesome combination of a square and a square block and template pieced triangles. So let's get started first with our square and a square.
So let's get started first piecing our square and a square block. You're going to get started with your fabric B squares. We're going to cut them in half diagonally. So just set up your ruler right over it and slice those squares in half. And you can see how we're going to piece this on all around that fabric C square in the center. I'll line this up. Carefully cut across. Okay, so to line this up, we have cut this just a little bit big. These pieces are just a bit big. And the easiest thing that I found is to fold it in half and create a little crease line right at the top. And do the same thing with your triangle. Very gently fold it in half and press a little crease line with your fingertips. And then you can line it up just exactly right, take it to your machine and stitch right across 1/4 inch seam allowance and go on ahead and stitch the triangles to the top and bottom exactly that way. So I have my pen placed and I'm just smoothing out the triangle over the square, making sure everything's in nice alignment. I'll slide it underneath my foot and start stitching. And I think it's important to pin in this situation because it lines everything up really nice and even. You're going to have this triangle overhang slightly on both sides. You want it to line up right in the middle of that square. So stitch all the way down and then just repeat the exact same process on the opposite side. So even before I press those triangles open and those seams open, I'm going to go on ahead and trim up these little triangles on the edges. I'm just lining up my ruler really carefully and I'll lop off those little triangles. Be careful not to cut the fabric C square. Just cut off the extra fabric, that fabric B, these little schniblets. And then of course, take those pieces, finger press them open nicely and then press with a hot dry iron. So the final step to our square and a square block, I'm going to fold it in half. Again, just lining up those two seam lines and do a little finger crease right in the middle. Do the exact same thing to your triangle. Fold it in half, give it a little finger crease, and then line up those two creases so that they're exactly in alignment. Pin it in place. And now let's take it to the machine and stitch through it one more time. We're going to go on ahead and attach this side, and our square and a square unit will be complete. So I'm going to slide this under the foot the exact same way we stitched the first set, making sure everything's nice and smooth from the edge of the triangle down to the pin. And just making sure that the edges stay nicely stacked on top of one another and in alignment with the edge of that patchwork foot. And one thing that's really important because we're pressing all of these seam allowances open is to lower your stitch length to 1.5, or in this case my machine only goes down to 1.4. It doesn't hit 1.5 for some reason, so that's the setting that I select. So I produce a nice tight stitch so I can press those seam allowances open. And I always stitch through these scraps just because it gets my foot up to the right height and it keeps those thread tails from making a big mess and wasting a lot of my bobbin thread whenever you pull out those long thread tails. You know, it stops you from accidentally getting everything sucked down in the machine too. So it's really helpful just to stitch through a little scrap, get started, and you can see how quickly this flows straight from one side and into the other, piecing these triangles on really quickly. So really, the square and a square unit might be something that you might want to cut out a lot of these and make a whole quilt with them. I think it'd be really cool. So here's our square and a square block, and of course we've got to press these seam allowances open from the back, so just really gently open that seam. You can see I like to run my fingernail across it just so it's nice and open and flat. And then we're going to press it flat, permanently flat, with a hot dry iron. And I really like to finger press rather than trying to dig the seam open with the tip of an iron. That really doesn't get it as flat. And it can also kind of create some shiny marks, some scorch marks slightly on your fabric. So always finger press first and then hit it with an iron. Now you've got your block together, just refer to your pattern. You're going to trim this up, making sure to align your ruler with these points to make sure this is trimmed up nice and square. So trim this up according to the instructions of your pattern, and that unit will be complete.
Next, let's start template piecing. I've created some templates for you on pages 6 and 7 of your quilt pattern. You want to print these out and make sure that this 1-inch square on both pages measures 1 inch. If not, double check your printer settings, print actual size. So here's how we're going to prep up our templates so they're easy to cut with. You're going to take the piece of paper and flip it over, and I'm just taking a piece of freezer paper, and this has kind of a waxy side on one side and paper on the other, and I'm just going to place it right over the back side of that template and then press with a hot, dry iron. So the wax is going to fuse itself to the paper, and it's going to help stabilize the paper and make it nice and stiff and easy to cut with. So we're going to do that one time, and I like to flip it over and just double check you don't want to see any kind of ripples or wrinkles on that template, and give it a press from the right side as well. Now flip it back over, and we're going to place another piece of freezer paper, again waxy side down, right on top, and give it another good press. So this is a cool way of stabilizing the freezer paper, of creating a very rigid template. We're still going to use our ruler, our rotary ruler, but because this is nice and stiff, you'll definitely be able to tell when you're cutting with it, and it's much more accurate. So again, flip it over, double check the other side, make sure it's nice and flat, no ripples, no wrinkles, and that's just a sign that the freezer paper has bonded really nicely with that template. So now I'm going to cut it out. And I do think it's a good idea to cut this out with your rotary cutter and mat rather than cutting it out with scissors. So this can be a little tricky to see just because it's a reflective surface here in the camera, but basically I'm just lining up the edge of my ruler right with the edge of that line, and I'm making sure that I don't cut off the black line from the template. I want to make sure that the template is full size. So I took the time to cut this out with my rotary cutter and ruler, just really carefully cutting along those lines. And this is going to be our template for cutting out our pieces of fabric. So I have 4 fabric A rectangles, and I'm going to stack these up really nicely together so they are right on top of each other and the grain line's nice and straight. If you want to, you can cut this in sets of 2, so do 2 pieces of fabric and then 2 more pieces of fabric, but I think it's possible to go on ahead and cut all 4 at once. Okay, you're going to place your template right in the middle, and again, try not to have it kind of wonky with the grain line. The reason why we're template piecing this unit is so that we have straight grain lines, at least on the edges, and that's why we're bothering to do it this way. You could also paper piece this, but really it's going to end up so much better within the block if it's template pieced. So now I'm going to take my ruler and line it up, and I am making sure to line that up with the edge of the template so the template is not extending here. I'm going to press really firmly with my hand and with my rotary cutter as I make that cut. Now I have one of these spinny cutting mats, so I'm just going to spin it around. And I'm making sure that that template hasn't shifted, and I'm going to line it up again with the next side. And this is where it's tricky. Sometimes the template wants to shift and move around on you. Just watch out for that. Get it right back in position, because the trick with this, the reason why template piecing can be challenging is that the template moves, or you start cutting off bits of it as you're cutting, and the piece that you end up with is smaller than it should be. So we've got one more side here. You can see I'm just really taking my time, making sure it's nicely aligned.
Okay, so now I have all these little dog ears. I want to make sure to do these just as accurate as everything else. Line up a ruler and cut it off. Don't forget to rotate your mat or just turn the whole template over. Turn the whole thing, pick up the whole thing and move it around. That's just fine. You don't want to end up cutting in a dangerous direction where you accidentally cut yourself. It's no fun. These little dog ears are important because that's going to help line up the shape, this piece number 1, with pieces 2 and 3. So one last little dog ear here. So that's how you cut out the shapes using template number 1, and that's ready to go. I have included this arrow here just simply because this is not an equilateral triangle, and you want to make sure that when you piece it, that this long edge is on the bottom of your unit. So we'll set that aside, and then I've also prepared templates 2 and 3, and we're going to cut this out the exact same way. So I'm going to line up my fabric D squares. I'm going to place the template number 2 on top, making sure that these edges are aligned with the straight of grain. So it's aligned nice and square and straight with the piece of fabric. And then line it up. The edge of the rotary cutter. This is the kind of the tricky part about template piecing. You know, just getting the shapes cut out nice and accurate, not shaving off the sides of the template, and not having anything shift as you go around. So just take your time with this and work one side at a time as you cut out your shapes. You can see that just popped up completely. That's okay. I'm just going to put it right back in position. Place my ruler back on top. Line it back up again. Don't panic if everything kind of flops surrounding you. It's not the end of the world. You can go on ahead and cut that dog ear. One thing that might even help is just to leave the ruler in place as you rotate, and then you just slide your ruler around over the template. That kind of works a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so that is piece 2 cut out, and we're going to do the exact same thing for piece number 3. So I'll meet you back here when all of your shapes are cut out and you're ready to piece this unit. So here is our triangle side unit pieced together, and I just want to emphasize it's important to lay out your pieces and just double check your template number 1 that it's lined up and pointing upward. It's really easy to kind of get this one flipped around. It's just a little close to being a perfect equilateral triangle. So make sure it's placed properly with pieces 2 and 3, and then you're going to take it and just flip it over piece number 2, and you're going to line up the top edge and the bottom edge and that side. We're going to take it to the machine and stitch this very accurately. So just take a second to make sure that that top edge and side is nicely lined up, and begin stitching. And make sure that no fabric extends beyond the edge of that foot. And then as I piece, I'm also double checking that the bottom edges align nicely as well. So this is kind of an odd angle. It's not a bias seam, but it's definitely an odd angle. So just be really careful that nothing stretches out of shape as you stitch all the way down. So those pieces pieced together, I'm going to flip it over to the back and give it a gentle finger crease. We want to be gentle here because, like I said, this is slightly at an angle and can definitely stretch out of shape, so just be careful with it. Give it a nice little press and return it to your layout, and then you're going to take piece number 3 and flip it over, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to line this up, and this dog ear at the top and the dog ear at the bottom should line up just exactly right. We're going to take this to machine and stitch that seam perfectly together. So again, I'm just lining everything up, making sure the edge of my foot is at that nice angle. And then as soon as I get a needle in it, it's kind of secure. I also start taking a look down here at the end and get that lined up as well. And the thing you want to avoid is any kind of excessive stretching, pulling, anything like that. Just let the machine feed it evenly through the machine. You know, let the machine do its job, basically, and it'll work out just fine. Again, I gave this a little finger crease and a press with my iron. Now, this has been intentionally designed to come out a little bit big, and I want to show you how to trim it up next. So the easiest way to trim this up and get it nice and square is to start by marking a line down the center. So I'm just lining up my ruler so I have a nice straight line right down the center of that triangle. So now I'm going to line up the 3 1/4 inch mark with that mark. I'm also eyeballing the point of that triangle, and I want there to be a 1/4 inch mark at that point as well. So lining all that up together, press firmly, and trim off the edge. And you can see I have intentionally designed this with about 1/8 of an inch on both edges, and there's a reason why I do this. I did this because it's really tricky to have template piecing come out just exactly accurate. It usually ends up being a little small. When I originally designed it, it was exactly right and it was coming out a little small, and I'd much rather have something piece up a little bit big and have you trim it down rather than have it come out a little too small. So that's why I made that choice. The top edge where we have the triangle point should come out just exactly right if that's the edge that you start piecing. So you'll need to trim off both sides, and then you'll need to trim off this bottom edge, making sure that the piece is 3 1/2 inches tall. So there we go. So our finished side unit is 3 1/2 inches by 6 1/2 inches, and just double check that with your ruler, trim it up carefully, working from that center line, and it's going to come out just right. We'll be ready to put our block together next. So to arrange our block, we're going to start with our square and a square unit in the middle, and then surround it with our template pieced triangles, and then we've got these fabric C squares in all of the corners. You want to make sure to line up your triangles so that you have the points pointing outward to get this beautiful effect. And to piece it together, you're just going to piece in rows, just sets of 3 units, and then piece those rows together, making sure to match these seams. And then attach your borders, and here's what it looks like whenever you finish block number 10. So that's it for block number 10. Just in case you need it, you can click right here to find the quilt pattern at leahday.com. I really enjoy trying new methods of piecing, and I can't wait to see your blocks. Definitely post them to the Block Party Facebook group so I can see your progress. Next week, we'll learn how to machine quilt this block with a combination of free motion quilting and walking foot quilting, so definitely join me for that. Subscribe to my videos on YouTube so you don't miss out on any quilting videos coming out next week. Until next time, let's go quilt!